It all started with a routine safety check. Nothing out of the ordinary. Just the kind of thing I'd been doing for years without even thinking about it. Checking pressure gauges, inspecting the valves, making sure every inch of the rig was operating smoothly. It was second nature to me, something I'd learned to do instinctively. But on this day, there was something different in the air. A quiet tension, like the calm before a storm. I couldn't quite place it, but I knew something was off. The sun was just starting to set, casting an orange glow over the oil rig, the water below shimmering like a vast empty mirror. It should have been a peaceful moment, but there was a heaviness that clung to the air. Then the phone rang. I glanced at the screen. It was my boss. I had no idea it would be the call that would change everything. "Yeah," I answered, trying to sound casual, like I hadn't already known this day was coming. "Too many checks," the voice on the other end snapped, sharp and precise. "You're costing us time. You need to wrap this up." I felt the words hit me like a slap, but I tried to stay calm. It wasn't the first time I'd been questioned about safety procedures, but this time felt different. His tone wasn't just frustrated, it was dismissive, as if all the years I'd spent ensuring the rig's safety didn't matter. My eyes darted to the equipment I was inspecting. Was I really holding up the process that much? "Just making sure everything is up to standard," I said, trying to explain. "We've got a lot at stake here. Safety comes first." There was a long pause. The silence felt heavier than the weight of the entire rig. "I said too many checks," he repeated, his voice colder. "Get it done, or we'll have to reassess your position." The words hung in the air, cutting through the static. I didn't know what to say. I stood there for a moment, looking out at the horizon. The phone still pressed against my ear, and felt something inside me shift. It wasn't just a conversation anymore, it was a warning. I hung up the phone and stood there, unsure of what to do next. The unease that had settled over the rig now felt like a crushing weight on my chest. I'd been with this company for almost 5 years. In that time, the oil rig had become more than just a job for me. It became my second home. The crew, they were my second family. We had a rhythm, a routine that kept us moving forward day after day.
Sure.
The work was hard, grueling shifts. Constant exposure to the elements, always knowing that one small mistake could cost someone their life, but we had each other. We stuck together. And in a place like this, that's all you had. I can still remember the early days when I first started, the excitement of being part of something bigger, something important. There was a deep sense of purpose in every task, no matter how small. Every check, every inspection, every minute of the day mattered because we were all in it together. Safety wasn't just a policy, it was a way of life. It was what kept us going, kept us safe, kept us coming home at the end of each long shift. Then, 6 months ago, everything changed. Our new boss arrived. At first, he seemed inefficient, no nonsense. One of those types who didn't waste words. He had this aura of authority, but it didn't feel oppressive. He was focused, quick to make decisions, and I figured that was just his style. It respected it in a way. The crew didn't have much to say about him. He kept to himself, focused on the work, and I suppose we all did the same. But as the weeks went by, something started to feel off. It wasn't anything I could pin down at first. Maybe it was the little comments he made during briefings, or the way he seemed to pull back from any real conversations with the crew. He wasn't cruel, but he wasn't warm either. There was an emotional distance that began to grow. We had always been a tight-knit team, but under his leadership, things felt different. Then came the safety checks, the very thing I had always believed in, the thing that kept the rig running smoothly and kept all of us alive, suddenly became an issue. At first, it was subtle, just a comment here and there, a glance at the checklist with a sigh. But over time, I could feel the shift in his attitude. The checks I once thought were necessary now felt like a burden to him. Asterisk, and as for me, I started feeling ... invisible. My role, which had always been integral to the operation, seemed less important now. I found myself second-guessing my decisions, wondering if I was just being overzealous. But deep down, I knew I wasn't wrong. I was just doing my job. So why did it feel like the very thing I valued was now the problem? It wasn't one big moment that turned everything. It was the small things. It's the things you try to brush off. But when they add up, they start to matter more than you want them to. Like when he'd glance over the safety reports, scanning them quickly, and then roll his eyes, as if the numbers were some kind of inconvenience. It was a brief gesture, hardly noticeable to anyone who wasn't paying attention, but it stung. It wasn't just a look, it was the tone, the body language. It was a subtle dismissal of something I cared deeply about. Or when we had meetings about new equipment, I'd bring up my concerns about its compliance with safety standards. The conversation would always go the same way. I'd lay out my worries, and he'd wave them off with a half-hearted chuckle. "You're overthinking it," he'd say, making a dismissive motion with his hand as if I was some kind of nervous wreck. "This stuff isn't as complicated as you're making it out to be. But the thing is, I wasn't overthinking it. My gut was telling me something was wrong, that we couldn't afford to ignore the small details. But every time I tried to raise the alarm, it felt like my voice was swallowed by the noise of his indifference. I began to feel like I was walking on eggshells. Every time I asked a question, every time I tried to assert the importance of a safety check, I felt like I was asking for permission to do something unnecessary. And the more it happened, the more I couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right, that there was a shift happening, something I wasn't being told. I kept trying to rationalize it. Maybe it was just stress. Maybe I was overthinking things. Maybe I was being too sensitive, or just not adjusting to his leadership style the way I should. But deep down, I knew it wasn't that simple. My instincts told me that my priorities weren't in line with his. I wasn't just seeing things. I wasn't imagining it. I hated the feeling of being constantly second-guessed, like my experience didn't count for much anymore. I couldn't put my finger on it, but a sinking feeling started to settle deep in my chest. The cracks were there, and no matter how hard I tried to ignore them, they were only getting wider. The day I was fired wasn't a shock, but it still hit me like a punch to the gut. I had been waiting for this moment, had known it was coming. But nothing could have prepared me for how it felt when it actually happened. I walked into the office, my boots heavy with the weight of every step. The sound of my feet on the cold concrete floor felt louder than it ever had before. There was something chilling about the stillness in the air, like the entire rig had gone silent in anticipation of what was about to unfold. He didn't even look up when I entered. His eyes were glued to the papers in front of him, silence hanging thick between us. "You're out," he said flatly, finally glancing up at me, his face as cold and expressionless as I'd ever seen it. Too many safety checks, too many delays. I felt a coldness seep into my chest, like all the air had been sucked out of the room. The words were simple, but they felt like a blade, sharp and final. There was no anger in his tone, no passion. It was clinical, detached, like he was reading from a script, delivering a performance with no stakes. Asterisk, it wasn't about my work. It wasn't about performance. It wasn't even about how many times I'd caught a small mistake that could have turned catastrophic. It was about the bottom line. "You're costing us too much," he added, almost like an afterthought. "You're slowing down production." The realization hit me like a wave, crashing over me and leaving me stunned in its wake. My commitment to safety, the very thing that I believed was keeping us all alive, had led to my downfall. It wasn't about me, about my dedication. My years of hard work. It was about the numbers, about how much money I was making the company lose by slowing things down for the sake of checking things that everyone else seemed content to overlook. I stood there, just trying to find something to say, something to defend myself with. Words didn't come. How could I explain that I was just trying to keep us safe? How could I make him understand that I wasn't wrong? The weight of it all pressed down on me. I realized, too late, that I wasn't just a part of the team anymore. I wasn't even a person to him. I was just a cost, a line item on a spreadsheet. And all my efforts, my years of dedication, meant nothing in the face of profit. I walked out of his office with nothing but the sound of my footsteps echoing in the empty hallway, and the cold weight of betrayal still heavy in my chest. I walked off that rig for the last time, the The weight of the box in my hands, more than just my belongings. It was my whole life on that rig, now reduced to a few personal items and the bitter taste of defeat. The salty ocean air hit me like a wall, mixing with the stinging taste of my own disbelief. I could still hear the hum of the engines in the distance, still feel the rocking of the rig beneath my feet. It should have felt like the end of a chapter, but instead it felt like I was floating in some strange limbo, unable to grasp what had just happened. The first few hours were numb. It was like I was on autopilot, unable to make sense of any of it. My mind kept circling back to the same moment, the conversation with my boss. The coldness in his voice, the indifference. How could I have gone from being an integral part of the team to being disposable in an instant? I kept replaying the conversation in my head over and over, trying to find a piece of it that made sense. Was it really about the safety checks? Was I really just slowing down production? Or was there something more I wasn't seeing? Something I hadn't known? Some shift that had been happening behind the scenes while I was focused on my job? It was all starting to feel like a blur, a mixture of doubt and confusion. I reached for my phone, hoping to talk to someone, anyone. My crew were my family. I needed to hear their voices, to find some kind of comfort in the familiar. But as I scrolled through my contacts, I found myself staring at the list, the names of people I had shared meals with, worked alongside, trusted, and none of them picked up. Not one. It was like the silence of the sea had swallowed me whole. The phone rang and rang, but all I heard was the hollow sound of my own unanswered calls. I couldn't understand it. Why weren't they answering? Why was everything so quiet, so distant now? I felt like I was fading, dissolving into the empty expanse of the ocean. The company I had poured my time and energy into, the people I had worked so closely with, it was all gone, just like that. And in that moment I realized that even though I had walked off the rig, I hadn't really left. Part of me was still there, drowning in the silence, and I had no idea how to pull myself out. Later that night, I found myself sitting in my car, parked in front of the company's office. The glow from the fluorescent lights inside cast long shadows across the parking lot, but it felt like an entirely different world, a world I didn't belong to anymore. The air was cool, a reminder of the ocean breeze I'd grown so used to on the rig. But the warmth from the car felt suffocating in comparison to the emptiness inside me. The tears came then. Unbidden and uncontrollable. It wasn't something I expected. It spent the entire day in a haze, numb and disconnected. But here I was, in the stillness of the night. With the weight of everything crashing down, the anger, the hurt, the humiliation had all rushed in at once, flooding me like a broken dam. I was angry at myself. Angry for trusting in a system that had failed me. Angry for not seeing it coming, for not realizing sooner that my place wasn't as secure as I thought. But most of all, I was angry at them, the company, my boss, the same people I had dedicated my life to. I had given everything to that job. Every shift, every hour, I put in more than I ever took. The rig had become a part of me, a place I was proud to be, a place I thought I was making a difference. I had spent years making sure that everyone went home safely at the end of the day, believing that the risks we took were worth it because of the work we were doing. Every time I'd stood there, watching the rig sway in the ocean breeze, I had convinced myself that what I was doing mattered. I wasn't just part of a crew. I was part of something bigger, something that required every ounce of focus and effort I had to offer. But now I was just another number on a spreadsheet, another expense to be cut, another cog in a machine that didn't care about the people who kept it running. It felt like the weight of the ocean was pressing down on my chest, too heavy to bear. The emptiness inside me expanded, filling every inch of the car, the darkness outside, and the pit in my stomach. I tried to breathe, tried to steady myself, but it was like the world itself was closing in. I could almost feel the waves crashing around me, relentless and unforgiving, dragging me under. I wanted to scream. I wanted to throw something, break something, anything to get rid of the crushing weight on my chest. But instead I just sat there, letting the tears come. There was nothing else to do, nothing left to fight for. I was defeated. The next morning, reality hit like a freight train. There was no more avoiding it, no more hiding behind the hope that maybe I'd wake up and everything would be back to normal. The phone didn't ring, and the emails never came. The company, the rig, my colleagues, all of it, had slipped from my grasp in a single, cold moment, and now I had to face the consequences. Asterisk. Stood outside my apartment, staring at the door, feeling a lump form in my throat. It was a place I had always considered home, a space where I could unwind, recharge, and shut out the world. But now it felt like an entirely different place.
The familiar walls, the cluttered living room, the scent of old coffee lingering in.
The air, they all seemed to mock me, as if they knew what I was trying to ignore. This wasn't home anymore. It was just a shell, an empty space where everything I had worked for had evaporated. I hesitated for a long moment before pushing the door open. The weight of each step felt unbearable, like I was walking into a place I no longer recognized. The silence inside the apartment was deafening. No radio playing in the background, no familiar murmur of a conversation I'd once had with friends or loved ones. It was just me in the stillness, echoing in the hollow of a life that had, in a matter of hours, unraveled. I'd always thought the quiet would be comforting, a reprieve from the constant noise of the rig. But now it felt suffocating, like it was pressing in on me from every corner. I reached for the phone, hoping for some distraction, some sign that I wasn't truly alone in this. But there were no calls, no messages. The people I had worked alongside, the ones I thought of as my family, none of them were reaching out. The person who had been there for me was gone too. My own isolation hit me hard. I thought of the countless times I'd shared stories with. My colleagues celebrated birthdays, fought for better working conditions, only to find that when the dust settled, it was just me left standing in the ruins. Asterisk, the reality was inescapable. I was alone. The job that had been my life, the place I had poured everything into it, was all gone. And there I was, staring at the silence of my own home, with nothing but the emptiness left to face. After days of silence, I couldn't take it anymore. I had to know why. I needed answers. So I went back to the office, at a building that had once felt so familiar, so filled with the energy of the team, now stood empty, silent, like a ghost of what it used to be. The fluorescent lights buzzed, softly overhead, casting a harsh, sterile light on everything, making it feel even colder. There were no meetings scheduled, no real reason to be there, but I had to see him. I had to hear it from him. I walked through the familiar hallway, past the empty cubicles, all the way to the small, sterile office where I had first been given my job. The door was slightly ajar, and there he was, sitting behind the desk. The same man who had told me I was too many safety checks, the one who had decided my future with the company. His eyes didn't even lift from the papers in front of him as I walked in, as though my presence meant nothing. I stood there for a moment, gathering what little strength I had left. I had been holding on to the hope that maybe he would explain himself, that maybe he would acknowledge the work I had put in, the years I had spent making sure the rig was safe for everyone. But when he finally looked up, his face remained cold, devoid of any emotion. There was no regret, no apology. "You're here because it was a business decision," he said, his voice flat, as though repeating a rehearsed line. "You were costing us too much. It's nothing personal, nothing personal." The words echoed in my mind, twisting with every passing second. It wasn't personal? After everything I had given? After every risk I had taken? Every late night spent going over checklists? Every ounce of my energy poured into making that rig safe? It was all just a business decision. I wanted to scream. I wanted to demand that he look me in the eyes and explain how he could live with himself, knowing what he had done to me, to all of us. How could he just toss me aside like a piece of paper when the lives of so many had depended on the work I did? But I was paralyzed. The words wouldn't come. Stood there, my body stiff, as the weight of his indifference crushed me. I couldn't find the strength to fight back, to demand justice. I was left standing there, powerless, like a spectator in my own life, watching the man who had just destroyed my career dismiss me with the same cold words that had already sealed my fate. And in that moment, I realized that the fight was over. There was no reasoning with him, no making him understand. The decision had been made, and I was nothing more than a casualty in the cold, calculated world of business. Time passed, and though it wasn't easy, it did pass. The weight of the betrayal didn't vanish overnight, but each day I started to feel like I could breathe again. I began talking to friends I hadn't seen in years, those who had been there before the rig, before all of it. At first it was awkward, like trying to connect with a version of myself that felt foreign. But slowly those conversations began to matter. They weren't just distractions or lifelines, little pieces of my past that reminded me I wasn't alone. I started to rebuild the fragments of my life, one small decision at a time. There were days when it felt like I was taking 2 steps forward and 1 step back, but at least I was moving. I found myself picking up old hobbies, things I had abandoned in the chaos of my job. One of the first things I did was take up jogging. At first it felt like just another activity to fill the time, something to do instead of thinking about everything I had lost. But as I ran, I realized it wasn't about fitness. It wasn't about gaining back what I'd lost physically. It was about reclaiming control, something I hadn't felt in months. With each step, I could feel a little more of my power return to me, like I was running towards the version of myself that wasn't defined by what had happened. And then there was therapy. It wasn't easy to walk into that office the first time. Wasn't sure what I was expecting. But what I found there was something I hadn't anticipated. A space to finally process the rage, the hurt, and the sense of betrayal that had festered inside me for so long. It wasn't just about unpacking the events of that day on the rig. It was about peeling back the layers of everything I had ignored, the fear, the insecurity, the self-doubt that had been buried beneath the surface for years. Through those conversations, I started to realize that I wasn't defined by my job. I wasn't defined by the rig, or by the way I had been discarded so easily. Those things didn't make me who I was. I was still the person who had cared enough to stand up for what was right. I was still the person who had worked day in and day out to make sure people went home safe. That was who I was, not the loss. And the more I reminded myself of that, the stronger I began to feel. It wasn't an overnight transformation. It wasn't about getting over it, because I don't think you ever truly get over something like that. But it was about rediscovering the strength that had always been there, buried beneath the layers of betrayal and hurt. It was about realizing that I could start again, that I was not broken, just bent and slowly. With each day that passed, I began to rebuild. Looking back, now with the perspective time has given me, I realize something I never would have known otherwise. Sometimes, being fired is the best thing that can happen to you. It doesn't feel like that at first, of course. When you're in the thick of it, when you're drowning in the shock and betrayal, it's hard to see anything good on the horizon. All you can see is the loss, the emptiness, the devastation. But as the days pass and the dust settles, you start to understand. Wasn't wrong for caring about safety. Wasn't wrong for standing up for what I believed in. I wasn't wrong for doing my job the way I thought it should be done. It's easy to question yourself in moments like this, to wonder if you missed something, if there was a way to avoid it, if you could have done something differently. I realize now that my commitment to the work, my insistence on safety, it was never about being right or proving something. It was about integrity. And no matter what the company or my boss decided, no matter how I was dismissed, that part of me was untouchable. In a strange way, being let go from that oil rig set me free. I didn't need to prove anything to anyone anymore. I didn't need their approval, their validation, or their permission to do what I knew was right. The pressure of living up to someone else's standards, the suffocating weight of a job that defined me, those things no longer had power over me as I walk away from the past. I'm not bitter. I'm not angry. Those feelings would only keep me tethered to something that no longer mattered. Instead, I'm choosing to move forward step by step with a sense of peace I didn't think was possible just months ago. Life isn't about the places you've been or the titles you've held. It's about who you become along the way, and I've learned to become someone who's not afraid to start again. So here I am with the future in front of me, and I'm walking forward with no regrets, no shame, Just the quiet confidence of someone who knows that their worth isn't defined by any company or job title. I'm free.